stop mourning the life you didn't live, a Zen meditation. Right now there is a heavy, static tightness anchoring itself behind your knees, paired with a restless, buzzing heat at the back of your neck that makes your mattress feel less like a place of rest and more like an interrogation table. You are likely lying perfectly still while your mind travels rapidly backward in time, walking through an old crossroads, rewriting a choice you made years ago, and staring at the phantom path of an unchosen lifetime. It is an exhausting, silent grief to live your current days while constantly looking over your shoulder, wondering who you would be, what you would own, or who would be loving you if you had only taken the other turn at that definitive intersection. You feel a biting, hollow regret, as if your present life is merely a flawed consolation prize, an accidental mistake that you are personally obligated to mourn. You are bracing your muscles against the reality of your current timeline, terrified that if you stop replaying the error, you will permanently accept a broken destiny. The immediate space around your bed is gently dissolving into a small, timber-framed shelter, built directly into the side of a massive granite cliff, high up on an alpine mountain pass. Let your awareness notice the crisp, sharp scent of wild mountain pine needles drifting through the cracks in the wood, mingled with the clean, biting taste of high-altitude frost that quickly settles the humid air around your face. The surface supporting you offers the unyielding, immense density of a bedrock ledge, a deep foundation of solid stone that has zero interest in your past timelines, your old mistakes, or the phantom versions of yourself you keep reanimating in the dark. Outside the shelter, a high mountain wind whistles steadily through the gaps of an ancient stone bridge, sweeping away the loose, dry leaves without ever shaking the granite joints. Nothing is forcing you to step backward into the valley of your regrets. Tonight, the mountain is holding your physical weight entirely in the immediate present. What you are carrying right now is not a sign of failure, and this profound ache of looking backward does not mean your life is permanently ruined or broken. You have simply been forcing your spirit to act like a desperate ghost, trying to inhabit an alternate reality that does not exist anywhere in the universe except within the friction of your own overthinking. Tonight, we will not force the mind to be entirely silent, nor will we demand that you magically erase the deep, painful longing for a different past. We are here to sit with the simple, unpolished reality of the step you are actually taking, discovering a form of peace that begins precisely when you stop trying to fix your history through internal shame. You do not have to solve your whole life tonight, dear friend. You are safe enough to soften into the dense, solid weight of this granite pass, because nothing is required of your path for the next few hours. A surprising insight from Buddhist wisdom points toward an unexpected paradox. The phantom timeline you are mourning is completely flawless only because it does not exist. The mind constructs these idealized alternate lifetimes as a way to escape the discomfort of our current friction, ignoring the truth that the other path would have brought its own winter storms, its own jagged rocks, and its own unique set of unchosen regrets. True liberation comes from recognizing that reality never actually splits. There is only one monumental, continuous step happening right now, which is the physical body resting on this bed. The suffering we carry is not the choice we made at the old crossroads, but the heavy, tightening resistance we bring to our current landscape, treating our genuine pain as a mistake rather than our actual territory. If it feels right, take a slow breath, letting that crisp, penescented air sink straight down into the muscles behind your knees, where the habit of running backward always seems to lock first. You do not have to repair your career, your relationships, or your old mistakes before the sun rises tomorrow. Right now, your only assignment is to notice that you have arrived at a very solid, wind-sheltered ledge, a place where your current physical existence is completely valid without needing to match an imagined perfection. Let the muscles in your jaw relax, allowing the expression of chronic regret you have worn all day to flatten out completely against the support beneath you. You have spent so long mentally walking backward that you may have forgotten the immense, grounding luxury of simply being a heavy stone block resting in its proper joint. Maybe you have felt this too, that sharp spike of internal panic when you think about letting go of your regret, as if choosing to stop replaying the mistake means you are admitting defeat or abandoning your potential. We condition ourselves to believe that continuous self-punishment is a form of correction, a way to prove to ourselves that we still care about being good. But if it feels right, notice that fear of dropping the timeline without immediately letting it dictate your physical posture. The thought that claims you are living the wrong life is just a passing whistle of wind. Through the stone gaps of the bridge, it has no power to shake the masonry of your current body, unless you give it your momentum. You can see the regret, name it as a phantom path, and still allow your skeleton to sink heavily into the bedrock. In a short while, we will travel up to the high pass arches to look at how a master stonemason tests the gravity line of a structure that must stand straight in a howling gale. But before we open that story, allow your physical frame to become acquainted with the concept of absolute structural presence. Imagine one of those massive mortarless granite blocks inside the ancient bridge spanning the misty gorge. It does not lean toward the left ridge or the right ridge. It does not wish it had been placed in a palace wall in the capital instead of this cold alpine pass. It simply holds its position against the adjacent stones, allowing its immense weight to settle straight down into the mountain, fully valid and complete within its own structural coordinate. Entirely unmoved by the loose debris falling into the canyon below, you have been treating your awareness like a time traveler, throwing your consciousness into an endless, circular loop that leaves your present self cold, fragmented, and shivering under the weight of an unleaved ghost story. You have weaponized your current struggles against the reality of your past choices, creating an internal division that is far more exhausting than any external difficulty you face. It is time to let the mind stop running back to the old intersection, to allow yourself to experience the profound dignity of being exactly where your feet are placed. There is a quiet, monumental bravery in allowing your perspective to be this solid, this heavy, and this unaligned with your imaginary timelines, without adding the extra weight of your self-criticism. You are not giving up on your future. You are simply pausing the frantic, impossible work of trying to live two lives at once. As you lie here, listen to the cadence of this voice as if it were the steady, low thrum of massive boulders settling under their own immense weight in the quiet mountain dark. There are no expectations placed upon your capacity to recover your lost time or your ability to fix your regrets in this hour. You do not need to figure out how to navigate the consequences of your old choices tomorrow, or how to explain your current position to those who are moving at a different pace. Let these words pass through your tired mind like a cool evening fog rolling through the granite arches, leaving the central foundation completely undisturbed. Every obligation to rewrite your history can wait on the lower roads. The alternate versions of your life are safe within the void of what never was, and your anxious thoughts cannot bring them into the light tonight. Give yourself permission to be completely single-focused for the remainder of this night, as we begin to step down the long pathway toward the high stone bridge. High on the windy alpine pass where the mountain ridge split the sky into two sharp horizons, a traveler named Run sat on a cold slab of granite, his body completely frozen in place. For months he had been attempting to cross the deep mountain gap by way of an ancient stone bridge, a massive structure that spanned a misty, bottomless gorge. Yet, every time he stepped onto the path, a heavy, paralyzing tightness took hold behind his knees. Instead of moving forward across the span, Run would walk to the edge, tilt his torso backward, and stare down into the dark valley miles below, tracking the winding outlines of an old dirt road he had abandoned 3 winters ago. The friction inside Run was a constant buzzing heat that lived at the base of his neck, draining his vital essence long before the sun had even touched the peaks. He was entirely consumed by a silent, bitter regret, replaying the old crossroads where he had chosen the high alpine route over the lower river path in his mind. He had built that abandoned valley road into a flawless golden paradise, a place where his steps would have been effortless, his pockets full, and his relationships free from the biting frost of the high altitude. He looked at the rough, unpolished stone beneath his current sandals with a quiet resentment, treating his present reality as a mistake, an accidental exile that he was personally required to mourn by endlessly calculating what might have been. The only other presence on the high pass was an elderly stonemason named Master Jin, who had spent 40 winters monitoring the alignment of the massive mortarless joints that held the bridge together. Master Jin was a man of dense, unhurried movements, his fingers rough as coarse gravel and his robes smelling of dry moss and chipped flint. He spent his days sitting on a low timber stool directly over the central arch, completely indifferent to the howling mountain gale or the loose shale that occasionally clattered down the cliff face. His attention was always deeply anchored in the physical weight of the masonry, his ears listening for the low, internal thrum that signaled how the blocks were settling against one another. One crisp morning, as a heavy freezing mist rolled through the granite walls of the gorge, a sudden violent gust of wind swept up from the canyon, whistling through the stone gaps with the force of an alpine storm. Ryun, caught in a fresh loop of overthinking, had crawled near the base of the first arch, his hands gripping the stone as he stared down at the obscured shapes of the lower valley, trying to visualize the life he had lost. His muscles were shaking with exhaustion, braced against the cold air, his mind completely fragmented as he tried to mentally walk 2 different roads at the same time. Master Jin rose from his timber stool, his sandals making a slow, scraping sound against the frost-covered path. He walked over to where the traveler was crouching, carrying a small physical object that hung from a worn cord, a small leather plumb bob, tightly stitched and filled with heavy lead pellets. The leather was darkened by years of hand oil, smooth and cold from the mountain wind. The old mason did not offer a grand philosophical speech or ask Run to forget his past. He simply knelt on the rough granite and let the heavy lead weight drop through a gap between 2 massive blocks, suspending it directly over the vertical center of the arch. The heavy leather pouch swung wildly for a few moments as the mountain wind battered its sides, but the lead pellets inside gave it a dense, uncompromising center of gravity. Slowly, despite the howling gale, the cord straightened out into a perfect, absolute vertical line, pointing directly down into the bedrock of the mountain itself. "Look closely at the leather cord, Run, Master," Jin said softly, his voice low and scraping, like 2 granite slabs grinding together in the deep earth. "You believe you are frozen on this pass because you made the wrong choice at the lower crossroads 3 winters ago. But look at where the lid weight is looking." Ryun leaned closer, his eyes tracking the straight line of the cord against the shifting curtains of alpine mist. The leather pouch hung completely true, its physical mass pulling it straight down toward the core of the peak, never tilting toward the left ridge or leaning backward toward the valley road behind them. "This stone arch does not lean toward the paths you abandoned," the old mason whispered, his rough fingers resting on the granite joint. "It stands through the mountain storm because its center of gravity is absolute in the ground beneath its feet. The road in the valley is not a paradise. Reunit is just dirt and water, holding its own rocks and its own storms. You have turned your memory into a phantom path, stretching your awareness backward until your knees are too stiff to walk the stone you are actually standing on. Why do you spend your winters trying to balance an arch on a valley that no longer contains your weight?" Ryun looked from the straight, leather cord to the massive, interlocking blocks of the bridge. Each granite block stood exactly where it had been placed, unmoving and dense, perfectly balanced by the equal pressure of the stones around it. The bridge did not wish it had been built across a different gorge. It did not regret the quarries it had left behind it, simply occupied its coordinates with a monumental, silent validity. A heavy, grounding quiet began to settle behind Ryan's knees, as if the restless, backward-looking scanning that had exhausted his youth had suddenly been snuffed out by the sheer mass of the mountain. He let his palms rest flat against the rough, cold granite, recognizing that the true weight he was fighting was not the difficulty of the pass, but the impossible, exhausting work of trying to live a life made of air. This high alpine mountain pass is not telling us to stop feeling, nor is it asking us to become cold, unyielding, and hardened like a frozen granite wall facing a winter blizzard. It is not suggesting that you should look at the old crossroads of your life with an artificial, forced indifference. or that you should pretend that watching a beautiful possibility fade away doesn't cause a sharp, cold ache right behind your knees. It is showing us something much quieter, a subtle realignment of your inner presence that occurs entirely within the way your awareness holds your current position. The real suffering Yun carried was not the simple fact that he had chosen the mountain pass, or that the valley road had its own distant trajectory through the hills. The true agony lived in the way his mind held that choice, treating his present reality as a personal failure that he was obligated to repair by throwing his thoughts backward in time. When we look into our own Latinite reflections, we can see that we often maintain this exact same exhausting pattern of mental time travel. In our modern emotional language, attachment is that rigid, desperate craving that says, I must force my past choices to be different, to rewrite the outcomes, and to fix the trajectory of my life before I am allowed to rest. Because if my current path has friction, it means my entire history is a broken error. We believe that by hypervigilantly replaying our old mistakes, we are protecting our future. But fraying your own spirit or constantly mourning an unlived ghost story is not a form of correction. It is fear masquerading as wisdom, turning your natural presence into a transactional debt that leaves you shivering in the cold alpine wind long before you can ever find your own peace. This is how we add a second wound to the first. The first wound is what life presents to us naturally, the reality that we must make choices with limited visibility, the unexpected hardness of certain paths we choose, the genuine grief of a missed opportunity, or the heavy fatigue that settles into our own frame after years of navigating an unchosen landscape. This first wound is like the freezing mist hitting the shingles of the mountain shelter. It is real, it is heavy, and it is a reflection of the natural variation that belongs to all human journeys. The second wound is the one we give ourselves when we sit in the dark and burn with shame, because our current life doesn't look like an imagined paradise. It is the mental loop that claims we are fundamentally ruined, because our path has led us to a quiet ledge, the constant self-judgment that turns a normal human limitation into an unforgivable verdict against our own right to be exactly where our feet are placed. True mindfulness, when translated into the language of emotional reassurance, is simply the capacity to notice that internal friction without immediately joining the backward chase. It is the ability to lie here in the quiet and see the thought that says, I am on the wrong path and I must fix it right now, or I am completely lost, without accepting that thought as an absolute truth. When you observe the regret without immediately reinforcing it with more thinking, a tiny pocket of space opens up behind your neck. You begin to realize that you are the vast, solid mountain pass that contains the experience. You are not the loose shale falling into the gorge below. The old choice is real, but your emotional collapse is entirely optional. You can let the past exist like the distant, misty valley, watching the wind move through the gaps without letting it drain your central foundation. Impermanence is often misunderstood as a cold reminder that everything we achieve will eventually crumble into the dust. But for a person who carries the weight of a paralyzing regret, it is a deeply liberating truth. It means that the intense emotional exhaustion you feel right now, the sharpest edge of the self-blame, the panic of being left behind, and the heavy fog of what might have been, is not a permanent fixture of your consciousness. The timeline you are replaying is not a static emergency that will remain frozen forever. It is a moving cloud formation that belongs to the larger sky of life. When we deeply absorb this, we stop demanding that our mind split itself until it fractures at the joints, and we allow it to be what it is tonight, a heavy interlocked granite block that has survived the storm and returned to its own center of gravity. Compassion is the immense grounded courage to meet your own exhaustion without turning it into a reason to feel guilty. It is looking at your own hollow fatigue, your unchosen paths, or your quiet need for stillness, and recognizing that your nature has done its best to navigate the crossroads, even when it was being asked to build an archway over a bottomless gorge. Compassion allows you to lay down the heavy, exhausting labor of overthinking, not because you have stopped caring about the quality of your life, but because you realize that stretching your awareness into a phantom past will never give your present self a genuine sanctuary. You are revealing a different kind of strength, one that does not depend on a rewritten history. Letting go in this frost-kissed landscape of the spirit does not mean you abandon your potential or that you become indifferent to your future goals. It means you release the extra struggle of demanding that your history be perfect before you allow your muscles to soften. It means expanding your awareness so wide that your old mistakes or your current unchosen limitations become just one feature of a vast, majestic mountain view. You are the entire alpine ridge, not just the traveler shivering near the first arch. The solid bedrock can hold the heavy dampness, the howling wind, and the empty space without losing its fundamental stability. By allowing your frame to settle into the present moment right now, you are pausing the war with your own choices, discovering a monumental self-belonging that survives precisely because it has stopped asking an old crossroads for permission to remain stable. If it feels right, let your attention drift quietly away from the distant, misty valley of your unlived timelines, gathering around the heavy, unmoving reality of your physical frame, resting right here in the darkness. There is absolutely no need to adjust your posture, to correct the alignment of your spine, or to force your breath into an artificial rhythm. Perhaps you might simply notice how the cool, crisp alpine air moves across your face, light and unconcerned, entering your lungs and leaving them entirely on its own. Even noticing this single, quiet chest movement is enough to begin stepping down from the labor of running backward. Your body is already sustaining its vital vertical alignment. Without your deliberate management, you can safely resign from the position of replaying old choices and become the silent witness to this natural, rising tide of frost-kissed air. With the next few exhalations, you might allow a deep wave of softening to settle through the muscles behind your knees and down into your calves. Imagine your physical frame becoming completely wide and flat, like a massive granite foundation block, settling deeper into the cliffside ledge under the weight of an alpine mist. If you notice a tightening in your neck or around your shoulder blades, where the habit of looking backward always seems to lock first, there is no need to fight it or try to push it away. There is no requirement to perform, to fix your history, or to prove your value in this dark room. You are fully permitted to let your skeleton spread out against the solid support beneath you, becoming as heavy and unhurried as a permanent masonry arch that has nowhere else it needs to travel tonight. As you drop deeper into this structural stillness, a sharp thought will almost certainly surface, attempting to pull you back into the old posture of tracking and adjusting your past choices. It might be an anxious question about a career path you abandoned, a memory of a relationship crossroads you wish you could rewrite, or a bitter projection about where you should be standing compared to your peers. When this happens, there is no need to punish yourself for overthinking. Instead of engaging with that mental friction, you might gently give this internal pattern a simple name, whispering it silently within your own awareness. You could say to yourself, balancing the arch, or perhaps valley walking. By naming the pattern, you step off the path of the struggle. You are no longer the one trying to force yourself to change your history, but the one observing the leather plumbob from a safe distance in the quiet shelter. Now, if the image feels comfortable, visualize that specific relationship regret or that deep sense of hollow looking backward as a heavy stitched leather pouch, dark, smooth, and cold from the mountain wind, resting heavily in your open palm. Feel the dense, loose weight of the lead pellets inside, recognizing how much vital energy you have spent trying to carry this mass across an imaginary road that does not exist. You do not have to force the pouch to disappear or pretend the old choice doesn't feel heavy. Instead, picture yourself letting the cord drop through a gap between the granite blocks beneath you, allowing the weight to pull straight down toward the core of the peak, aligning your center of gravity completely with the bedrock of the mountain itself. As you leave the pouch there, let the image change in your mind's eye. Watch the evening mist roll over the granite arches, bringing with it a vast, cool dampness that slowly wraps the gorge in shadow. Instead of seeing your current path as an exile, watch the masonry within your own structure grow completely still, its mortarless joints turning into a smooth, steady curve that reflects nothing but its own inherent density. The stone doesn't move as the outside wind intensifies. It doesn't strain to reach the roads hidden in the lower valley. The cool mountain air settles straight around the frame, leaving the central joints entirely undisturbed, because the mind has stopped trying to travel down the phantom path. The weight of your unlived lifetimes is no longer being supported by your trembling hands. It has been integrated into the massive, silent permanence of the mountain, which is fully capable of sustaining its own cliffs without your constant anxiety. There is no need to force a sudden sense of perfect validation or a dramatic emotional release right now. True transformation within the inner reservoir does not happen like a sudden crash of a rockfall. It is a slow structural settling, like deep granite components becoming completely seasoned by the alpine air over many winters. Even if your heart still holds a remnant of its daily regret, or if your mind remains somewhat active, you are still practicing the art of absolute structural presence. You can return to this grounding practice whenever you are ready, or you can simply let it dissolve into the background of your awareness. The bed is holding your skeletal frame perfectly, requiring no effort from your legs or your memory. And for the next several hours, your absence from the crossroads is fully sanctioned. 2 full moon cycles after his quiet encounter with the Master Mason's alignment line, Ryun found himself seeking shelter lower down the alpine ridge, where the high granite walls began to give way to ancient, twisted mountain pines. Although the tightness behind his knees had begun to ease its rigid grip, the deeper challenge of his internal transformation lay in confronting a situation where his habit of replaying old choices would be tested by a raw, immediate obstacle. The heavy mountain fog had descended like a thick wool blanket, forcing him to spend the night in a low timber-framed outpost inhabited by a quiet woodcutter named Kenzo. This workspace was deeply saturated with the scents of bitter pine sap, damp moss, and the sharp, crisp aroma of freshly cleft wood that had absorbed decades of mountain winters. Kenzo was a man whose presence felt as rooted and coarse as the old stumps surrounding his clearing. His movements deliberate and unhurried, his hands showing the deep scars of his labor. He spent his hours maintaining the high trails, ensuring that the heavy winter snows would not trap the lowlanders or shatter the young growth along the steep slopes. On the night Yun arrived, the woodcutter was sitting quietly near a low-burning hearth, sharpening the edge of a heavy iron-rimmed wooden wedge. This tool was a simple block of seasoned oak, bound at its widest face by a thick band of hand-forged iron, worn smooth where the heavy wooden beetle had struck it 1,000 times. The internal friction inside Ryun sparked into a restless, burning heat the moment a sudden, thunderous crack echoed through the ravine outside the shelter. A massive, rotting pine log, which had been leaning precariously over the pass for years, had finally succumbed to the weight of the high-altitude frost, collapsing directly across the narrow granite path that led to the next province. Jiro looked through the open timber doorway at the colossal trunk blockading the trail and felt the familiar, frantic panic lock across the back of his neck. In his mind, this fallen timber was an absolute catastrophe, an insurmountable error that mirrored the ruined trajectory of his own life. He felt an immediate, desperate impulse to rush out into the freezing fog, to grab his travel staff and to try to single-handedly drag the massive, waterlogged trunk out of the way before the morning light. The old habit of his overthinking mind whispered that if he could just force this path to be perfectly clear by dawn, if he could undo this sudden obstacle through sheer, punishing physical exertion, he would prove that he was not stuck, that he was not behind his peers, and that his life was still within his absolute control. He began to pace the dirt floor of the shelter, his chest heaving as he mentally rehearsed an impossible battle against the massive weight of the fallen wood. Treating the natural fall of the tree as a personal insult he was obligated to resolve through his own exhaustion, he stepped out into the damp, freezing air, his fingers wrapping tightly around the rough bark of the fallen giant, straining his muscles until his joints groaned in the dark, trying to move a mass that belonged to the bedrock itself. He was treating the natural movement of the forest like an emergency that defined his entire worth, believing that if he could not force the world to reshape its landscape, he was fundamentally broken. As he pulled against the frozen wood, His footing slipped on a patch of black ice, sending him crashing heavily against the granite ledge. His palms scraped and his breath knocked from his frame. He sat in the cold mud, staring at the dark, impassable barrier, burning with a deep, familiar shame, convinced that every path he touched was destined to end in a dead stop. Kenzo did not rush out to lift him, nor did he display a single trace of anxiety as the alpine wind whistled through the pine needles above the clearing. He walked slowly out of the timber shelter, carrying only the heavy iron-rimmed wooden wedge and a long-handled wooden beetle. He did not attempt to drag the tree or match his physical strength against the massive trunk. He walked to the center of the obstruction, knelt down where the ancient wood had naturally split from its old trunk years ago, and placed the narrow tip of the iron-rimmed wedge directly into a small, pre-existing fissure in the grain. The woodcutter stood up, adjusted his stance on the granite path, and lifted the heavy wooden mallet high above his shoulder. He did not strike with a frantic, aggressive speed. He paused, letting his breath drop straight down into his lower belly, aligning his posture completely with the center of the oak block. The first strike was a low, resonant thrum that vibrated through the floor of the pass, a solid impact that drove the wedge an inch deep into the frozen heart of the pine. The ancient log did not move or roll, but a deep, long sigh seemed to escape from the compressed fibers of the wood as the iron-rimmed wedge established its presence within the split. "Look at the stump where this giant used to stand, Ryun," Kenzo said softly, his voice low and rhythmic, matching the steady rise of his mallet. "You are breaking your own skin trying to lift a tree that took 80 winters to grow its weight. You believe this barrier is a personal failure, an error that proves your journey is ruined. But look at what the wedge is actually doing." He delivered a second, massive blow, the sound cracking through the crisp air like a lightning strike. The wedge sunk deeper, and with a loud splitting groan, a massive fissure tore down the entire length of the log, separating the rotting, heavy exterior from the clean, straight grain within. The wood did not disappear from the path, but its rigid, monolithic tension was instantly broken, separating into smaller, manageable fragments that could be easily rolled aside when the morning sun thawed the ice. The woodcutter lowered his mallet and rested his palm on the iron-rimmed oaken block. "This pine does not apologize for falling across the granite, Ryun," he whispered, his eyes fixed on the clean split in the wood. "It grew its branches where the wind pushed it, and it fell when its season was complete. You are sitting here in the mud trying to undo the winter, staring at the old root where you think the tree should still be standing. You have turned this trail into an interrogation room, treating every natural rockfall as proof that you are on the wrong mountain. Why do you spend your nights trying to rebuild a branch that was severed 3 winters ago?" Ryun looked from the iron-rimmed wedge to the split halves of the massive log resting on the granite path. The wood sat exactly where it had fallen, heavy and silent, no longer a single, terrifying barrier, but simply a natural collection of grain and frost that could be met one piece at a time. The path was still blocked for the night. The fog was still thick, and the morning remained uncertain. But the frantic, desperate need to force the landscape to change had completely dissolved within his breastbone. A profound, settling quiet descended into Ryan's frame, as if the habit of treating every unexpected obstacle as an absolute truth had been shattered by the strike of the mallet. He took one slow, unhurried breath, allowing his scraped palms to rest quietly on his knees, choosing to sit with the simple uncertainty of the dark past without needing to rewrite his history to feel safe. He did not become a flawlessly enlightened sage in that hour, nor did he magically erase the memory of the valley road he had left behind. His transformation showed itself in one small, disciplined shift. He stopped treating his regretful thoughts as commands to run backward. He looked at the split pine trunk and realized that his endless replaying of the old crossroads had never been about finding a better life. It had been an attempt to escape the simple, unpolished reality of his current step. He rose from the damp earth, walked back into the shelter, and lay down on the simple cedar planks, allowing his body to become as heavy and still as the stone joints of the bridge above, completely at peace with the knowledge that the trail would still be there tomorrow, and that his only assignment for the remainder of the night was to let the mountain hold his weight. When we look directly into the deep, dark spaces of our internal architecture, we discover that the mind has spent years using the illusion of endless alternative choices as its primary mechanism of defense. We construct an entire identity around the notion of what we should have been, replaying an old crossroads and fixing our thoughts onto a phantom path, believing that our current worth is tied directly to an imagined perfection that we somehow left behind. When a sudden obstacle manifests in our daily life, or when a choice from our past results in a cold alpine wind of difficulty, our sense of structural stability collapses. To escape this vulnerability, the ego initiates a punishing routine of internal interrogation, attempting to scold our tired spirit for ever making a mistake. We replay old conversations, rewrite old decisions under the harsh light of self-blame, operating under the assumption that if we just refuse to accept our reality, we can force the past to yield. This deep-seated resistance to our own actual coordinates is the exact process that converts a simple state of human limitation into a profound spiritual exile. Buddhist wisdom illuminates this internal trap by distinguishing between the two distinct layers of weight we meet in our journeys through the world. The first pain is simply what the natural world delivers, the reality of an unchosen consequence, the unexpected hardness of a specific mountain path, the genuine grief of watching a possibility fade, or the heavy fatigue that settles into our limbs after years of navigating an unpolished terrain. This first pain is like the sudden falling of the rotting pine log across the mountain trail. It is heavy, unpredicted, and a reflection of the natural laws that govern all changing things. We cannot always prevent these events from occurring, as the past is a solid stone ledger that we do not own and cannot rewrite. The second pain, however, is the intricate architecture of suffering that the mind manually constructs on top of that initial difficulty. It is the panic that labels our current position as an absolute failure, the self-judgment that claims we have no right to exist comfortably if we are not standing where our peers are standing, and the desperate rehearsal of future scenarios where we imagine ourselves permanently trapped because we took a different turn years ago. This second pain is fueled by our desire for external approval, the fear of sitting with the uncertainty of our actual trajectory, and the habit of turning our specific regret into our entire identity. We stop viewing ourselves as a vast, spacious landscape that happens to contain a difficult winter pass, and we begin viewing ourselves as a broken, accidental error that must apologize for every patch of frost it encounters. You do not have to spend your remaining energy feeding this second pain tonight. While you may not be able to clear every fallen log from your historical path or magically erase the consequences of your old crossroads, you can absolutely choose to withdraw your fuel from the war with your own history. When you pause the internal battle, you are not engaging in a weak surrender or pretending that your emotional grief does not exist. Instead, you are establishing a completely different relationship with your difficulty. True peace is never found by demanding that your life become an immaculate, untroubled highway that never encounters a sharp curve. Peace is discovered when you realize that your awareness is deep enough to let the unchosen timelines exist outside your windows, without letting them shake the central foundation of your current structure. We often cling to our regrets because we fear that if we stop replaying the error, we will permanently accept a compromised destiny. We treat our actual unpolished life as an unjust defect, throwing our thoughts against our own boundaries until our internal landscape is completely bruised. But look at what happened to the heavy iron-rimmed wedge driven into the frozen heart of the pine trunk. It did not require a frantic, dangerous lifting of the entire giant to break its monolithic tension. It simply required the woodcutter to stop fighting the mass and align his tool with the natural split that was already present in the grain. Slowly, the teaching becomes personal as you lie here in the quiet, allowing yourself to see that your current limitations are not a punishment, but an invitation to step down into the absolute structural presence of your own spirit, discovering a form of stability that survives precisely because it has stopped trying to build a bridge over an unlived lifetime. This high alpine pass, with its mortarless stone joints and iron-rimmed oak wedges, is not an abstract landscape meant only for ancient travelers. It is a structural reality meant to be inhabited tonight, right here on your mattress, and tomorrow when you step back into the fast, demanding networks of modern existence. We encounter our own heavy, phantom pathways every single day in the quiet, contemporary frictions that cause our necks to tighten and our minds to spin backward. You practice this when you are lying awake at midnight, staring at the dark screen of your phone, checking for an urgent text message or a reassuring notification, trying to find an external anchor to prove that your current life is not an accidental failure. We buy a fragile, fleeting security by constantly monitoring the progress of others, turning our attention into a frantic time machine that walks backward through our old choices, while our actual life sits cold and unlived in the dark. Think of how often you smile while feeling immensely heavy inside, offering an agreeable, hollow optimism to your colleagues, your family, or your friends, because you believe your current timeline cannot afford to show its limitations. We look at the chaotic pacing around us and instantly begin trying to control our relationships, fearing a future where our unpolished choices will leave us stranded behind our peers, and feeling a biting guilt the moment we want to simply close our eyes and rest. We treat our desire for a break as an earned luxury that must be purchased through continuous, flawless productivity, replaying a professional mistake or an old relational crossroads in the dark until our internal joints are completely frayed. In all these moments, we are acting exactly like the traveler on the edge of the gorge, tilting our torso backward to stare at a valley road that no longer holds our physical mass. True peace is not a grand, immaculate highway that you reach after straightening every crooked path or erasing every old regret from your history. It is a quality of structural gravity practiced in the smallest, most ordinary pauses. A single, unhurried breath taken before checking a screen for reassurance or reacting to an old habit of self-comparison is a profound form of spiritual wisdom. It is the exact second you look at a wave of regret and realize that not every frantic thought deserves your absolute obedience, and not every heavy feeling is a command to run backward into the past. You can care deeply about your future potential and your loved ones without gripping your old timeline so tightly that your current foundation begins to fracture. You can rest tonight without earning it through endless internal self-punishment, trusting that your actual coordinates require no external validation to remain completely stable. Tomorrow, when the old pattern whispers that you are living the wrong life or that you are fundamentally left behind, remember that you have the option to let the leather plumb bob drop true. When an unexpected obstacle or a silent gap appears in your daily routine, you can choose to sit quietly with that uncertainty rather than trying to force the landscape to rewrite its history. You can allow your physical presence to become heavy, dense, and contained, letting the natural mass of your current reality settle completely across the granite floorboards of your awareness. The world outside will continue its immense, changing seasons without your constant mental monitoring. And for the remainder of this night, the most compassionate action you can take is to leave the old crossroads alone, letting the slow, monumental resource of your own center hold your frame perfectly straight in the dark. The whistling of the wind through the stone gaps of the bridge is slowing down now, drawing your awareness deeper into the quiet, warm shelter that remains when all your unlived lifetimes have been laid down on the granite. Let your breath become completely soft, a faint and shallow vibration that requires no steering, no tracking, and no historical correction. With every slow rise and fall of your chest, imagine your physical frame losing its sharp, anxious postures, absorbing the cold stillness of this alpine pass, just as the unpainted timber absorbs the damp mist of the clearing. Your shoulders are sinking heavily into the mattress beneath you, letting go of their long routine of alertness, melting down into the unmoving foundation that has been waiting for you all along. The gorge is entirely quiet out there in the dark, its massive ridges resting effortlessly beneath the thick winter fog, without needing you to trace a single line of defense or stand watch. At the edge, you can feel the deep, comforting weight of your limbs as they soften, becoming as dense, unhurried, and steady as that heavy iron-rimmed wedge wedged silently against the split heart of the fallen wood. The storms of the world can continue to move above you, rushing and shifting through the high peaks, but they cannot disturb the profound stillness that lives at the very bedrock of your being. The heavy dust of your old identity is washing away in the dark, leaving your heart clean, seasoned, and entirely at peace with the distinct coordinate of your current existence. There is nothing left to fix before the sun rises, no path to repair, and no one to rescue from their own natural journey through the weather. The mind is no longer walking the valley. It is simply letting the lead weight rest in the ground, allowing the massive permanence of the mountain to hold what you could never change through force of will. Your breath is growing quieter now, a faint murmur of frost through the pine needles, regular, distant, and perfectly safe. You have returned to your own quiet source, a place where you are permitted to be completely empty of timelines, completely useless to the crossroads, and completely supported by the granite ledge. Let the words dissolve into the cold air of the room, leaving behind only the deep, heavy sensation of a body that has finally chosen to settle into its own containment. The fog is slow, the humidity is heavy, and your eyes can close with an absolute certainty that the peak will hold its own boundaries while you disappear into the shadows of sleep. You are safe enough to stop existing as a time traveler for the remainder of this night, allowing your consciousness to sink softly through the frost-kissed depths into the perfect immobility of the central keystone. How much lighter does the stone become when it stops apologizing to the mountain for the direction the trail had to bend? The space beneath the granite arches opens wide to receive the heavy, silent weight of your presence, offering a quiet, monumental shelter that has never asked for anything but your willingness to rest. In this deep and insulated space, the exhausting mental habits of the daylight hours lose their momentum, dissolving one by one into the cool night fog that blankets the mountain. You can feel the mattress beneath you as an absolute uncompromising timber deck, a firm foundation that does not shift, warp, or demand that you justify the space you occupy. The long, rigid pathways of your nervous system, which spent the day locked in a state of constant, scanning vigilance, are expanding now, softening into the deep, golden warmth of this sanctuary like seasoned wood resting after a long storm. Think of how the ancient, interlocked timber of the outpost absorbs the relentless pull of the wind that sweeps through the mouth of the gorge. It does not strain to reach the distant peaks, nor does it complain about the cold, irregular slaps of the frost driven against its grain. It simply remains completely still, allowing the immense weight of the winter to distribute itself naturally across its surface, fully integrated with the laws of gravity and earth. In this quiet hour, your physical frame is permitted to exist in that exact same unbothered state. You do not have to perform, you do not have to fix, and you do not have to trim away a single piece of your natural perimeter to deserve this rest. You are fully sanctioned to be as heavy, as separate, and as warm as the iron-rimmed wedge resting on the stone floor. We carry such an immense, unnecessary burden when we treat our unchosen choices as a personal failure or a betrayal of our inherent value. We burn our remaining life force replaying our old crossroads, searching for the exact moment our presentation faltered, operating under the false assumption that if we just monitor ourselves tightly enough, we can force a silent past to return our reflection. But the old woodcutter reminds us that the anchor stone holds the path precisely because it remains heavy in its own element. Your stillness is not a deformity. It is the unique coordinate where your true center of gravity lives, aligned directly with the unmoving core of the earth rather than the shifting winds of the open pass. Let the breath become even smaller now, a tiny, almost imperceptible current of warmth that moves like the slowest mist through the open window frame. There is no longer any need to manage the rise and fall of your chest, or to watch your thoughts to make sure they are orderly. Everything is moving on its own natural rhythm, a quiet, involuntary pulse that links your physical form to the silent turning of the dark earth. You are no longer the traveler leaning over the wet railing, nor are you the judge presiding over the utility of your own heart. The tools have all been dropped, the iron wedges have been laid down on the floorboards, and the night is managing its own immense cycles without a single drop of sweat from your forehead. The small, lingering anxieties that still hover at the edge of your consciousness are nothing more than flakes of bark drifting away in the mountain wind, losing their sharp edges and sinking one by one into the shadows of the gorge. You do not need to reach out your fingers to catch them or try to organize them. Before tomorrow, you can simply watch them pass through the open spaces of your awareness, growing smaller and more distant until they vanish entirely into the silver dark. Your chest is completely wide and unconfined, an empty frame where the cool evening air can pass without meeting a single knot of resistance, carrying away the last remaining scale of your daily labor. You have stayed strong for long enough, carried the searchlight for long enough, and fought your own grain for long enough. The earth has accepted your perimeter, and it is holding your foundation with an absolute, unconditional tenderness. Sink further still into the warm, heavy bedrock of your mattress, letting the last faint embers of your wakefulness dissolve into the eternal, steady murmur of the wind beneath the fog. There are no lists to complete before the dawn, no paths to repair, and no unchosen futures to navigate within the theater of your thoughts. The iron is perfectly seasoned, the timber is steady, and the deep quiet has claimed every ounce of your ancient resistance, leaving behind only the pure, unhurried sensation of a heart that has finally returned to its own unconditioned home. Let yourself be carried down into the deepest, darkest silence of the mountain floor, where the pressure is stable, the night is permanent, and there is absolutely nothing left for you to carry, nothing left for you to defend, and absolutely nothing left for you to solve. The vast, unblinking center of the mountain remains perfectly still, fully content to exist within its own boundary of stone, while the vastness of the outer sky continues its restless movement. In this deep layer of the night, your mind is invited to settle into that exact same self-contained validity, leaving behind the exhausting habit of looking across the dark pass for an echo. The heavy, honest weight of your physical frame is pulling you down into an absolute structural rest. You can feel the mattress beneath you as a solid, seasoned timber frame that has completely stopped demanding that you project your energy or overcompensate to satisfy the silence of the world. The long, delicate strands of your awareness, which spent the day stretching toward the horizon to capture approval, are uncoiling now, expanding into the gentle golden warmth of this sanctuary like raw moss, soaking in the quiet dark. Think of how the old stone bridge behaves when the winter storm intensifies and the thick alpine mist begins its long, silent descent over the promontory. The granite arches do not tilt toward the storm or strain to follow the path of the wind. They simply stand firm on their low bedrock foundation, insulating the center and allowing the pressure to distribute naturally through the joints. The seasoned stone is cool, firm, and completely unbothered, asking the path no questions about its visibility or the number of travelers it has guided through the reef. In this quiet hour, your spirit is permitted to exist in that exact same unaligned state. You do not have to negotiate your value. You do not have to fix the distance in your connections. And you do not have to force a single silent soul to see your worth. You are fully permitted to be as heavy, as quiet, and as complete as the lead weight resting beneath the wood. We carry such a heavy, unnecessary sorrow when we treat an unexpected barrier as a verdict that we are fundamentally lacking or incomplete. We spend our remaining energy replaying our words, searching for the exact moment our devotion failed to hold the trail, operating under the false assumption that if we just fray our own edges tightly enough, we can force a cold horizon to return our reflection. But the old stonemason reminds us that the plumb bob holds the line precisely because it stays heavy in its own nature. Your boundary is not an exile from compassion. It is the unique coordinate where your true center of gravity lives, anchored directly into the unmoving floor of your own awareness rather than the shifting moods of the open sky. Let the breath become even more distant now, a tiny, almost imperceptible current of warmth that moves like the slowest frost through the open window frame. There is no longer any need to manage the rise and fall of your chest, or to organize your thoughts to make sure they are pleasing. Everything is moving on its own natural rhythm, a quiet, involuntary pulse that links your physical form to the silent turning of the dark earth. You are no longer the traveler leaning over the wet railing, nor are you the judge presiding over the utility of your own heart. The tools have all been dropped, The heavy mallets have been laid down on the floorboards, and the night is managing its own immense cycles without a single drop of sweat from your forehead. The small, lingering anxieties that still hover at the edge of your consciousness are nothing more than dust particles drifting away in the wind, losing their sharp edges and sinking one by one into the shadows of the ravine. You do not need to reach out your fingers to catch them or try to organize them. Before tomorrow, you can simply watch them pass through the open spaces of your awareness, growing smaller and more distant until they vanish entirely into the silver dark. Your chest is completely wide and unconfined, an empty frame where the cool evening air can pass without meeting a single knot of resistance, carrying away the last remaining scale of your daily labor. You have stayed strong for long enough, carried the heavy wedge for long enough, and fought your own grain for long enough. The earth has accepted your perimeter, and it is holding your foundation with an absolute, unconditional tenderness. Sink further still into the warm, heavy bedrock of your mattress, letting the last faint embers of your wakefulness dissolve into the eternal, steady murmur of the wind beneath the fog. There are no lists to complete before the dawn, no paths to repair, and no unchosen futures to navigate within the theater of your thoughts. The iron is perfectly seasoned, the stone is steady, and the deep quiet has claimed every ounce of your ancient resistance, leaving behind only the pure, unhurried sensation of a heart that has finally returned to its own unconditioned home. Let yourself be carried down into the deepest, darkest silence of the mountain floor, where the pressure is stable, the night is permanent, and there is absolutely nothing left for you to carry, nothing left for you to defend, and absolutely nothing left for you to solve. The absolute, unblinking center of the mountain pass continues to hold its position in the wide darkness, offering a silent, monumental container that has never asked for anything but your willingness to rest. In this deep and insulated space, the exhausting mental habits of the daylight hours lose their momentum, dissolving one by one into the cool night fog that blankets the granite ridges. You can feel the mattress beneath you as an absolute, uncompromising timber deck, a firm foundation that does not shift, warp, or demand that you justify the space you occupy. The long, rigid pathways of your nervous system, which spent the day locked in a state of constant, scanning vigilance, are expanding now, softening into the deep golden warmth of this sanctuary like seasoned wood resting after a long storm. Think of how the ancient, iron-fined timber of the mountain outpost absorbs the relentless pull of the wind that forms the mouth of the gorge. It does not strain to reach the distant peaks, nor does it complain about the cold, irregular slaps of the frost driven against its grain. It simply remains completely still, allowing the immense weight of the winter to distribute itself naturally across its surface, fully integrated with the laws of gravity and earth. In this quiet hour, your physical frame is permitted to exist in that exact same unbothered state. You do not have to perform, you do not have to fix, and you do not have to trim away a single piece of your natural perimeter to deserve this rest. You are fully sanctioned to be as heavy, as separate, and as warm as the oak wedge resting on the stone floor. We carry such an immense, unnecessary burden when we treat our unchosen choices as a personal failure or a betrayal of our inherent value. We burn our remaining life force replaying our old crossroads, searching for the exact moment our presentation faltered, operating under the false assumption that if we just monitor ourselves tightly enough, we can force a silent past to return our reflection. But the old woodcutter reminds us that the anchor stone holds the path, precisely because it remains heavy in its own element. Your stillness is not a deformity. It is the unique coordinate where your true center of gravity lives, aligned directly with the unmoving core of the earth rather than the shifting currents of the open sky. Let the breath become even smaller now, a tiny, almost imperceptible current of warmth that moves like the slowest mist through the open window frame. There is no longer any need to manage the rise and fall of your chest, or to watch your thoughts to make sure they are orderly. Everything is moving on its own natural rhythm, a quiet, involuntary pulse that links your physical form to the silent turning of the dark earth. You are no longer the traveler leaning over the wet railing, nor are you the judge presiding over the utility of your own heart. The tools have all been dropped. The iron wedges have been laid down on the floorboards, and the night is managing its own immense cycles without a single drop of sweat from your forehead. The small, lingering anxieties that still hover at the edge of your consciousness are nothing more than flakes of bark drifting away in the mountain wind, losing their sharp edges and sinking one by one into the shadows of the ravine. You do not need to reach out your fingers to catch them or try to organize them. Before tomorrow, you can simply watch them pass through the open spaces of your awareness, growing smaller and more distant until they vanish entirely into the silver dark. Your chest is completely wide and unconfined, an empty frame where the cool evening air can pass without meeting a single knot of resistance, carrying away the last remaining scale of your daily labor. You have stayed strong for long enough, carried the searchlight for long enough, and fought your own grain for long enough. The earth has accepted your perimeter, and it is holding your foundation with an absolute, unconditional tenderness. Sink further still into the warm, heavy bedrock of your mattress, letting the last faint embers of your wakefulness dissolve into the eternal, steady murmur of the wind beneath the fog. There are no lists to complete before the dawn, no paths to repair, and no unchosen futures to navigate within the theater of your thoughts. The iron is perfectly seasoned, the timber is steady, and the deep quiet has claimed every ounce of your ancient resistance, leaving behind only the pure, unhurried sensation of a heart that has finally returned to its own unconditioned home. Let yourself be carried down into the deepest, darkest silence of the mountain floor, where the pressure is stable, the night is permanent, and there is absolutely nothing left for you to carry, nothing left for you to defend, and absolutely nothing left for you to solve.